Hey friendo, Steve here.
And Larson.
The business of professional wrestling is a really weird one, populated by characters with unpredictable personalities on and off screen.
So it's not surprising that the biggest show in town, WWE, would be targeted by some of these personalities, unafraid to piss off Vince McMahon to advance their own career goals, regardless of the bridges they burn in the process.
So here are 5 wrestlers who screwed over the WWE. Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett's one of the more interesting personalities in the world of professional wrestling. While he's an extremely accomplished businessman behind the scenes, thanks to his upbringing by father Jerry Jarrett, a legendary promoter in the business, his on-screen accomplishments are debatable at best.
No one can argue that his 70-plus championships aren't impressive, but we feel he was hardly ever an actual draw outside of his home territory of Tennessee's USWA, where he won a lot of gold.
But we tend to agree with the sentiments of the late Mike Graham, who, in a WCW documentary, famously said, "Jarrett smashed 6,000 guitars and never drew a dime."
Which is why it was so weird that he ever landed a high-profile spot in either WWE or WCW, and even more weird that he landed multiple high-profile runs in both companies. He was a multiple-time IC champion in WWE, and Vince Russo made him the world champion in WCW.
We just figured Jerry Jarrett had some dirt on people or something. We have no evidence to suggest as such, so that's simply our own pure uneducated speculation. But something has to explain how this guy kept getting pushes.
And for a guy who had the business end of things in his blood, it was surprising to hear that he held his own holdout at the No Mercy pay-per-view, where he was supposed to drop the IC title to China as his contract was expiring.
Or rather, it had expired. According to both China and Bob Holly in their respective autobiographies, the WWE didn't realize that Jeff Jarrett's contract had expired prior to the pay-per-view. The claim is that Jeff went to Vince and basically held him up for $300,000, said, "I'm not going to drop the IC title to China unless you pay up," which Vince was forced to pay in order to get the belt off Jeff and onto China.
According to Jarrett himself, the holdout was much ado about nothing, and that he simply asked for what he was owed, and the WWF gave him some stock options. We don't know who's telling the truth, but if he did walk in and demand Vince pony up $300 large, he's got a massive set of slap nuts.
Yeah, he said, "Give me money, Slappy." Anyways, Jarrett went on to become WCW World Champion, and in the process delegitimized the big gold belt to the point of no return. The company was bought by Vince McMahon 2 years later.
Jeff went on to form TNA Wrestling, so it could be argued that without Jeff Jarrett, we never would have got the final deletion. So if nothing else, he was good for that.
Yeah, Jeff Jarrett is nothing but an obsolete mule.
What the hell is slap nuts is like the worst catchphrase ever.
And it was on TV. You see people in the crowd of those pay-per-views wearing slap nut shirts.
Slap nut.
Slap nut. Ultimate Warrior! Despite the moniker, the Ultimate Warrior was never quite as ultimate as he made himself out to be. Granted, his cartoonish persona and indecipherable promos were wildly entertaining, and he somehow appealed to kids in the late 80s, probably thanks to the ADD epidemic the US suffered back then.
That would explain a lot.
Yeah.
The Warrior was essentially sensory overload, and that seemed to fit the real-life personality of Jim Hellwig, a man who seemed to confuse fantasy and reality more than most in the business.
He literally changed his name to Warrior in 1993, which sparked a series of back-and-forth lawsuits with the WWF. But that's another story for another time. About a year after his historic win over Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6 for the WWF World title, and about 6 months after his weak title run was over, he sent a letter to Vince McMahon demanding more.
Among other things, he wanted to be paid the same or more than Hulk Hogan, who at the time was their perennial big-ticket moneymaker. Hogan was proven to be a draw, whereas the jury was still out on whether Warrior was a flash in the pan or a long-term attraction.
The jury, by the way, was leaning heavily on flash in the pan. In any event, he concluded the letter by basically saying, "If you don't pay me these ridiculous demands, I'm going to sit out SummerSlam," which was right around the corner.
Vince relented, gave the Warrior what he wanted, and as soon as Warrior's spot at SummerSlam was done with, BAM! He was given a letter by Vince essentially saying, "Fuck you!" He didn't literally say that, but the gist was Warrior would be suspended for threatening to no-show SummerSlam. Instead of taking the suspension, he offered up his letter of resignation, which the WWF no-sold because he was under contract for another year and change.
Incredibly, Vince rehired Warrior a few years later and had planned to run with the world title for him. But the feds were cracking down on steroid use in pro wrestling. That run was replaced by a release by the company after Warrior tested positive.
This was followed by another run in 1996, but this time it was super short-lived, and the only memorable thing about it was when he beat Triple H at WrestleMania 12 in less than 2 minutes.
He no-sold the shit out of that pedigree, probably the only person to ever do that. The Warrior was a one guy immune to the Clique's locker room politics. That's crazy.
Yeah, pretty much. I was trying to think of somebody else, but drawing a blank.
He was immune to a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
Like logic,
Reason, common sense, good taste.
Medusa! Way back in 1993, the WWF made the decision to revive the dormant Women's Championship and wooed former Dangerous Alliance member Medusa away from WCW to carry the newly minted title.
Medusa, who had previously won championships all over the world, was redubbed Alundra Blaze and managed to win the belt 3 times in the span of 2 years before becoming an unfortunate victim of the WWF's financial problems and being released by the company in December of 1995.
Not long after, she showed up on WCW Monday Nitro and promptly dropped her WWF Women's title into the garbage live on air. You can see Bobby the Brain Heenan just putting his head down like this, like, what the fuck?
It's like, this is the low point for the industry.
Yeah. It was one of the opening salvos in the Monday Night Wars, and to this day, it's one of the most shocking examples of Eric Bischoff's hubris.
After her retirement in 2001, Medusa spoke about the incident and expressed some regret about her participation in the segment, stating that Bischoff coerced her into taking part.
The WWF Women's Division would once again go on hiatus for 3 years until being revived in 1998 when Jacqueline defeated Sable on an episode of Monday Night Raw right here in Sacramento, California to claim the new women's title and kickstarted a renaissance in women's wrestling.
And Medusa recently made amends with Vince, accepting an invitation to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2015. She even brought the belt she once threw in the trash with her for her induction.
Yeah, with all the talk these days about what the new SmackDown Women's Championship will look like, why not bring that old belt back? Granted, it looks like a 99-cent store toy compared to the Raw belt, but SmackDown in general looks like a 99-cent store wrestling show compared to Raw. Anyways, so it fits.
Wait, do you want the belt Medusa threw in the trash to come back, or the belt that was introduced in 1998?
Yes, definitely. Rick Rude! When you think about the subject of untimely wrestling deaths, the name Rick Rude is always one of the first names that comes up. One of the best workers in the business during his run in the 80s and early 90s, his charisma, chiseled physique, and amazing airbrushed tights, which often featured his own face or the IC belt, which he had a memorable run with.
His death in 1999 at the age of 40 caught the wrestling world off guard. Even planning a comeback after a devastating back injury in 1994 forced him to prematurely retire as an in-ring competitor.
But while he was unable to perform in the ring, he was still an imposing figure as a manager outside the ring, and he became the only person to appear on both Raw and Monday Night Nitro on the same night in 1997.
In August of 1997, he returned to WWF after a short stint in ECW, where he was aligned with Shane Douglas's Triple Threat stable. When he came back to the Federation, it was the insurance policy for, are you ready? The newly formed Degeneration X.
Suck it! Rude wasn't signed to a full-time contract, though. Rather, he had a deal that essentially paid him for appearances week to week. This ended up biting the WWF in the ass when, out of anger towards Vince for the Montreal Screwjob, he showed up on Nitro on November 17th, 1997, and ran down the company, calling the WWF the Titanic, a sinking ship, and sporting the classic Rick Rude mustache.
That same night on the USA Network, a fully bearded Rick Rude appeared with DX, a feat made possible not through some form of cloning or space-time manipulation, by virtue of the fact that Raw was taped, so his appearance was already in the can.
To make matters even more bizarre, the weekend prior to all that, he appeared on ECW Hardcore TV, which he had been doing all along with the consent of the WWF because he wasn't running down the company on Paul Heyman's show. On
WCW, he started managing his legit best friend Kurt Hennig and was one of 8,000 other wrestlers to join the NWO. Rude ended up leaving WCW in early 1999 and died in April of that year from an overdose of pills.
Rude will go down as one of the all-time greats who never held the WWF World title. It's rumored that Hulk Hogan wouldn't work with Rude because Rude was a legit tough guy, but if he had, we have no doubt Rude could have been one of the biggest and best heel champions of all time.
It's also rumored that Randy Savage used Rude as a bodyguard when going out to bars, as drunken fools would traditionally want to fuck with the world champ.
Yeah.
That's saying a lot about Rick Rude.
Lex Luger! Despite the moniker, Luger was never quite the total package he made himself out to be. He was dull, often incoherent on the mic, stiff in the ring, and by and large unenjoyable to watch, except when Bruiser Brody no-sold the shit out of him.
Yet somehow the Lex Express managed to muster a decent career in the wrestling industry, winning multiple world titles, and he was at one point the toast of the WWF after defeating Yokozuna by countout.
They were really happy, even though he didn't win the title.
I mean, they carried him on their shoulders.
Yeah, like he did something. He was primed to take over as top babyface after Hulk Hogan left the WWF, but that seemed to fizzle after that aforementioned landmark countout victory. Instead, Luger languished in various feuds with the likes of Tatanka, Ludwig Borga, and Crush.
So I guess we can understand why Lex might have been looking for greener pastures once his WWF contract expired in August of 1995. So after a talk with the man called Sting, the wheels were set in motion to bring Luger back home to WCW.
Only problem was that WCW head honcho Eric Bischoff didn't like Luger, quote, personally or professionally, and it took much prodding from the Stinger before Bischoff agreed to offer Lex a contract at 20% of his previous WCW pay.
Surprisingly, or perhaps not, Luger accepted the deal. But he neglected to tell his previous employer, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, that he was leaving his company. One day after appearing in a WWF house show, Luger saunters through the Mall of America with a collarless puffy shirt, happens upon a taping of WCW Monday Night Nitro, and decides to go where, as he put it, the big boys play.
Again, for 20% of what he was paid during his first WCW run. I'm actually not sure who got screwed worse in this whole deal, Vince or Luger.
Oh, Luger for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if Vince was ultimately relieved that he rid himself of the total package.
Luger was like, Vince, WCW is offering me 20% of what I was making before to go to their company. What should I do?
And Vince probably said, go for the money.
Oh, Lex, you should follow the money. So there you go. There are 5 times wrestlers had the grapefruits to screw over Vince in the WWE. Let us know if you think of any more in the comments.
And be sure to check out the list we did yesterday about 5 sex scandals that rocked the wrestling world.
Yeah, F content.
Well, there's no actual fornication in it, is there?
Maybe they have to watch the video to find out.